All right, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a little bit of a different sort of content. Still Gardens of the Moon, so nothing crazy. But I just wanted to discuss we're halfway through Gardens of the Moon. So if you haven't read parts 1, 2, and 3 yet, go do so. There may be spoilers. Nothing major, as today I just want to really discuss and kind of take the temperature, take a step back and look at kind of how the different characters are interacting and the different factions we're seeing develop. So I've got the whiteboard out. Hopefully the lighting isn't too bad. It's nighttime, so usually this room gets a lot of natural light when I'm filming, but we're mixing it up today. But I just wanted to get the whiteboard out so we could really lay out and see where we're at. So yeah, we're about halfway through Gardens of the Moon, and I've just been loving my reread of it, but then two, just loving making these videos, really digging in and diving in. And don't worry, my summary, kind of official part 4, where I cover everything and go over all the events of part 4 will be coming soon, but this just feels like a good point. I'm about halfway through. That's why I released my video on the Jagged Tyrants, kind of taking really the measure of where a lot of the plot and conflict is going. And that kind of sparked this idea of, okay, let's go ahead and actually take a look at kind of how these different factions of characters are developing, where they stand. There's not, with Erikson, you never get a lot of true black and white, really. And characters are constantly fluid, it feels like. But it feels like a natural time to kind of, as we're building towards the climax of Gardens of the Moon, to see kind of how all the major players are falling out, if you will. Because if you haven't read Erikson, and this is your first time through, you'll know it's almost like the world's giant, largest game of chess. That's how a lot of the endings of his books feel. So if this is your first time through Gardens of the Moon and you're lost, hang in there, because obviously the payoff at the end is very high, and it only gets better and better as the series develops and you get more information and you really start connecting more and more with these characters. I think that's why people can struggle so much with Gardens of the Moon. Hopefully that's not the case for you. But you're just thrown into the fire and you just have to kind of figure everything out right away. But if you just stick with it and give it enough time, it'll help. And hopefully this video will just give you a bit better idea of where, people stand and how things are shaking out, if you will. So obviously the first one is we have the Malazan Empire, obviously. But even within that, so we have the Empress Lysine. There goes my cat. But we have factions within the actual army itself. Obviously, you have the Empress, which the adjunct, I would say, definitely falls into this category. Essentially, and even in the text itself, it's constantly referenced that the adjunct is essentially the Empress on Genebacchus. She has full authority to act on the Empress's behalf. So obviously that's a very easy connection to make. Along in the same group, I would say we have Taishran. Better spell this right. I think that's right, but forgive me if it's not. We definitely have Taishran. We see this especially right at the beginning, where there seems to be this plot where these two, and we don't know for sure, it's still very much, the Bridge Burners and the Second Army in general seem to believe this is the case, that this faction, for whatever reason, is trying to eliminate the Bridge Burners. Bridge burn. We'll do that. As you can tell, my handwriting is horrific, but you get the general idea, and it's not so much important. Hopefully you can read this. I know red probably wasn't the best color, but you get the picture. So we've got the Empress, the Adjunct, and Taishren seem to be kind of their own coalition, but then with Erickson, nothing's ever simple. So with the Adjunct, you have Tool, who is a bit of an unknown. He's obviously the Talani Mas, who kind of just shows up. We know the Adjunct and him are working together on what seems, we see at the end of part 3, what Tattersail ended up believing and giving her life for. She believes that this group, for whatever reason, is trying to awaken a Jagged Tyrant, which if you haven't checked my last video out, go do that. I examine more in detail kind of what this idea of a Jagged Tyrant is and a little bit of what it looks like. So we've got this group, and their motivations are pretty ambiguous because we don't get a lot of perspective, and they never come out and say, like, we never get a scene with the Adjunct where she's directly trying and plotting with Taishren to eliminate the bridge burners. We have a pretty good idea that's what they want to do, and we even see, I believe it was one of the excerpts discussing Whiskey Jack that I talked about in my last video as well, where the Empress seems to feel threatened by Whiskey Jack and the bridge burners because you have the Second Army, it's well known, is more loyal to Dujak and Whiskey Jack than they actually are to the Empire. And that seems to be why the bridge burners keep on getting put in these positions where they're basically set up to fail and die, essentially. So obviously, the foil to the Empress and this faction would be, I'll call it the Second Army. Second Army. And obviously you have Whiskey Jack, Dujak, and really the bridge burners as a whole. Obviously your Quick Ben, your Callum, all the bridge burners fall into this category. But an interesting one here is this: at the dinner party, we see Tak the Younger, who is a Claw, the representative of the Claw, which is another extension of the Empress. So we could put up here even with Tool, just the Claw in general. We know these are the Claw is the assassins of the Empire. And Lacine was, I believe, the founder of the Claw, if I'm not mistaken. But if not the founder, then the head, the commander of the Claw. So the Claw have strong loyalty to the Empress, which is why that dinner party with Tattersail, Tak the Younger, Dujak, Taishren, the Adjunct, which obviously is all our major players, why it's so important that we see Tak the Younger. He's there representing the Claw, but we actually see when he covers for Tattersail that his loyalty actually lies with the Second and the bridge burners. So that's pretty pivotal. And I do, a lot happens at that dinner party. I discuss it a lot in my overview of part 3, but that's a very important scene to key in on. So we get, interestingly, Tak the Younger falls into the Second Army. But then we still, like I said, nothing simple with Erickson. So we have these other players like Sari. Sari is in the Bridge Burners group. By all means, should fall into this category, but very much is not. But then you also have the Adjunct and Perrin, who teamed up before Perrin was appointed to the Second, and we'll get to him in a minute. But we have the Adjunct and Perrin teaming up a couple of years ago, so this goes way back, to find and eliminate Sari, essentially, because they know they found out that this young girl was possessed by by the god of assassins, essentially. So that's another interesting dynamic here, where Sari, okay, she's part of the Second Army, very much in the Bridge Burners Corps, but is an outsider within that group, and she doesn't have a tie. Obviously, the Empress and the Adjunct are trying to eliminate her, so we know she doesn't fall in that group either, and that's where we get this other player, which I would say is just Shadow. So we know we're starting to learn more and more about the how a little bit of how gods interact with the mortal realm. We have Whiskey Jack giving a very early warning that when gods meddle, usually humankind suffers. A lot of people tend to die. So we have this third player that is really Shadow. Obviously, we have the two gods. We've got Shadow Throne, or Ascendants, I should say. And we also have the god, or the patron they call it, but of assassins, who we saw at the very early on, right after the prologue, if not in the prologue, where Shadow Throne and the patron of assassins, also known as the Rope, basically, they essentially possess Sari. So, and we know, so Shadow Throne does his own thing, right? But the god of assassins possesses Sari. So now Sari is the Rope. And that's why, and it's easy to forget that she's a 17-year-old girl. I'm sure it's very shocking. We, Whiskey Jack and Callum very much don't trust her whatsoever, know she's bad news. But, did I say Whiskey Jack? But I meant Quick Ben and Callum. Whiskey Jack, on the other hand, has a very difficult time seeing past the fact that she's just like a 17-year-old innocent-looking girl and can't really recognize the brutality that Quick Ben and Callum both recognize, and they know she's bad news. So that's another interesting character to keep an eye on, because we have the Bridge Burners don't trust her at the moment, but she's very much in their squad, and then the Adjunct and Perrin are actively trying to essentially eliminate her because they have seemed to figure out that she's been possessed by an Ascendant. So that's very interesting, and we also have another one that kind of melds these boundaries a little bit, at least at the start, which is Perrin. Perrin obviously was essentially the Adjunct's sidekick in her hunt for Sari. And the Adjunct essentially was using Perrin to find Sari, because there seemed to be a connection there. But then we get the conversation between Perrin and Tak the Younger, I believe it was, where this really, if we hadn't figured out Tak the Younger had allied himself with the Second Army and the Bridge Burners, then Perrin and Tak have this conversation where they just come out and say it. Where they both agree that they're going to do basically everything they can to protect and follow Whiskey Jack. So Perrin starts here, but then ends up going over, and I would say at this point at least, he's in with the Second Army. How that plays out, we'll see how it goes. But Perrin's also yet another interesting one, because we also have a fourth player, run out of colors here, and that's Open. And this is the Ascendant of basically luck and they're really twins, so they're the push and pull of luck, if you will. And Perrin, we see Open brings him back to life. Perrin died, and Open said, "No, you didn't. Come back, and we'll use you basically as a pawn." And they give him this sword, which has no right, a mortal weapon, can't wound a Hound of Shadow. Yet we see Perrin defend Tattersail and seemingly mortally wound a Hound of Shadow. So we know that's important too. So we also have Perrin. And we also know that Ascendants and gods, they don't have much regard for mortals. So Perrin is very much being used as a pawn. So it's important to see him through that lens, that he's another extension of Open, and it can be interesting looking at his actions, not taking them at surface level, things that happen around him. It's always a good idea to keep in your mind that Open may have their hand in this, if you will. And then along with Open, we also obviously have the coin bearer, and that's Crocus. So we can also look at everything he does through the lens of Open as well, that, his actions and events that spiral out of the things he do. It's important to recognize that this could be all part of Open's master plan. They are an Ascendant after all, so they know a lot more than our poor our poor mortals who are just pawns and don't seemingly have a lot of control over their life at the moment, based on everything we've seen and the few references we see, like Whiskey Jack warning, and Crone also speaks about how, when Ascendants get involved, things can get pretty brutal and bad news for just average day mortals. So, and that kind of leads to the events we're building towards. So we know we've got at least 2 Ascendants in play here, very much taking active roles in everyday life. And we know we've gotten some pretty good warnings that it's bad news, but we're kind of seeing how it's actually going to play out. And then we also have another faction here. And you can see how things can get a little confusing in Erickson's writing because there's so many characters, and it's not like it'd be simple if it was this interaction, right? Where we have the Lysine, the Adjunct, and Taishran kind of doing everything they can to eliminate the Second, because the Second is seen as a threat to the throne, because the men of the Second are more loyal to Whiskey Jack and Dujac than they actually are to the Empire. Obviously, if you're an emperor, you don't want that. That's bad news for you. You want to eliminate that as quickly as possible. Taishran is also another really interesting character because we don't see a whole lot, and we haven't gotten anything from his perspective yet, other than he seemingly was the one who eliminated most of the Second Army at the Siege of Pale. He seems to have turned on people, and then obviously he sent Beladrin to stop Tattersail as well, and that's another character where Tattersail definitely I would have put over here, because obviously she ended up sacrificing herself to at least slow down Taishran and the Adjunct's plan. But nothing's black and white, so we don't know for sure they were trying to awaken the Jagged Tyrant, but Tattersail obviously firmly believed that was what they're planning, and obviously acted, sacrificing her life because she believed it to be true. So that's yet another interesting character. And then we also have this group who Kruppa is a part of, one of my favorites, obviously. We'll put them in black too. But we've got kind of the people of Darujistan. And here we've got Kruppa. We've got, obviously, Crocus. So another one. So we've got Perrin, Perrin here and Perrin in the second, and then we have another pawn of open here as well. So open's kind of spread into a couple different factions at this point. Then we got Ralik Nam, obviously the assassin. And I would actually put in here as well Animander Rake and the Tistandi. Because, and I say that because we know Animander Rake is trying to resist the Malazan invasion. So he's very much opposing these two. And even though the second is depicted really just as good soldiers. They're just doing what they're ordered. They're going where they're told. And they're just kind of going about their business. So Animander Rake very much opposing the Malazan Empire as a whole, and obviously that the main arm of that, if you will, would be this up here with the adjunct in Taishren, because obviously he resisted at Pale. That was obviously all what the siege of Pale was about, and then we also see him once Malazan turned their attention to Darujistan. Animander Rake was not far behind either. And then I'd also put in here Baruch, who we know is a pretty important player, it would seem, in how Darujistan is run, and we may see more of that play out as we continue on in the book. But yes, that's yet another faction, and you've got Open and Shadow, and interplaying with the events in Darujistan, and Darujistan kind of, unfortunately for them, is just caught in the crosshairs of the Malazan Empire as a whole. So this is kind of the setting and the literally what could be the battlefield. It's just where it's taking place because Malazan has already, the Empire has already kind of ripped through the rest of Genebacus. And then just a quick note here too. We also have Kaladin Brood, who also seems, and we haven't seen a whole lot of him, but they definitely, Animander Rake and Kaladin Brood, there's probably more going on there than we know right now, but Kaladin Brood is very much acting in the same capacity in the north as Animander Rake has been in the south of Genebacus, and that's just resisting the Malazan invasion. So he's another character that you'd want to, just perk your attention when, you get a rare scene with him in it. So, but yeah, that's kind of, I hope you guys enjoyed, the different style video. I know you may not have seen a lot of what went on in the whiteboard, but hopefully I'll work on that and figure out the camera settings better so it's easier for you guys to see. But I just wanted to kind of get at least on on paper, if you will. I take a lot of notes, but just take the temperature and get a gauge of kind of who the players are at this point, and then the different factions and a little bit of the different motivations going on here. You can definitely see we're only 300 pages into one of the largest fantasy series of all time, and we've already got all this going on. So I'm someone who loves that. I love getting not knowing every little detail as it happens. I like trying to figure stuff out and just being a little lost. So I hope you guys are enjoying your read of Gardens of the Moon as much as I am. But yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.